I had been up since dawn, chopping vegetables, seasoning the roast, and making sure every detail of the table was just right. Harper had been flitting around, excitement buzzing in her every movement. It wasn't often that we hosted, and I wanted this night to be memorable. To prove, maybe even to myself, that I was more than just the quiet graphic designer who had somehow lucked into their daughter's life. The house smelled of garlic and rosemary, a warm, inviting aroma that wrapped around you, coaxing hunger before a single bite had been taken. I had spent hours preparing, picturing their smiles, imagining Bruce, my father-in-law, clapping me on the back with a gruff but approving, "Nice job, Cole." I wasn't sure why I had built up that expectation, but I had. Maybe I was naive. The doorbell rang. Harper's fingers tightened around my arm, her eyes alight with excitement. "They're here," she breathed. A small jolt of anxiety mixed with pride flickered through me. They entered in a rush of noise and warmth. Bruce's voice boomed first, loud and commanding. Elaine followed, her pleasant giggle weaving through the conversation. Trevor made some joke about traffic, flashing his usual smirk, while Mia trailed behind, quiet and observant as always. I greeted them all, shook hands, handed out drinks. The energy felt good, hopeful even. Like we were building something steady, something welcoming. The table gleamed under the soft glow of the lights, each plate stacked neatly, napkins folded just so, the roast steaming in the center like the crown jewel of the night. I pulled out Harper's chair, the small, familiar gesture grounding me. Then, as I moved to sit myself, it happened. Bruce was quick, quicker than I expected for a man his size. He reached down and slid my plate right out from under me, as effortlessly as if it had been his to take all along. Without hesitation, he passed it to Trevor, who smirked at me like this was some long-standing joke I had never been in on. "You eat after the genuine men," Bruce said, his voice low, flat, like he was stating something as simple and irrefutable as the time of day. I froze, my hand still hovering midair, reaching for a chair that suddenly felt miles away. I blinked, certain I had misheard. But the room moved on like nothing had happened. Forks clinked. Elaine asked someone to pass the salt. Laughter rippled through the conversation. I looked at Harper. Her lips were pressed tight, her eyes flickering to mine for the briefest second before she looked away. "It's custom," she murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. "Tradition." Something in my chest twisted, sharp and deep. Instinctively, I reached for the plate, not even thinking, just moving. But Harper's hand brushed against mine, a quick, silent shake of her head stopping me in place. Trevor was already digging in, tearing into the roast I had spent the entire day perfecting. He beamed, looking smug, looking pleased, while Bruce leaned back, arms crossed, watching me like he was waiting for a reaction. Elaine didn't look up. Mia kept her eyes down. I wanted to say something. "Give me my plate back. This is my house." But the words felt thin, weak, like dry leaves crumbling in my hands before I could even throw them. So I sat there, hands in my lap, heat creeping up my neck, my empty place at the table staring back at me like an accusation. They ate. They laughed. They swapped stories about Bruce's past hunting trips, passing around dishes while I sat in silence, waiting like a child left out of the grown-ups' table. And when they were done, when their plates were scraped nearly clean, Bruce shoved the half-empty serving dish toward me. "Go on," he said, like he was doing me a favor. I picked up the spoon, scooped what was left onto a new plate, and ate without tasting a single bite. The roast I had seasoned, the meal I had crafted with care. It might as well have been ash. Harper wouldn't meet my gaze. The evening dragged on, their voices fading into an indistinct hum. I nodded when it seemed appropriate, forced a laugh when it was expected, but inside, I was somewhere else entirely. By the time they left, offering noisy goodbyes and half-hearted thanks, I was already thinking about what came next. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew one thing for certain. This wouldn't happen again. Not like that. Not ever. The dishes stacked high in the sink. Harper moved through the kitchen, scrubbing at a pan with easy, practiced movements, humming to herself as if nothing had happened. "They liked the food," she said. Like that made it okay. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was still trapped in that moment, replaying Bruce's words, the smirk on Trevor's face, the way Harper had whispered tradition, like that explained everything. Real guys. What did that even mean? I had worked for this life. Built something with Harper. Paid for this house. Provided this meal. Wasn't that enough? She scrubbed at the pan, shoulders relaxed, completely at ease. Maybe to her, this was normal. Maybe this was just how things had always been. But it wasn't how things were going to be with me. I dried my hands slowly, deliberately. Something settled inside me then. Not loud. Not yet. Just a quiet, solid promise. They'd see. They'd all see. The next morning, that dinner still sat heavy in my chest. Harper was already in the kitchen, pouring coffee, humming like it was any other Sunday. I paused in the doorway, watching her. Waiting. For something. Anything, a sign that last night had mattered to her the way it had to me. That she had noticed. That she had felt the same sharp edges I had. But Harper just moved easily through the kitchen, humming under her breath, pouring coffee like it was any other morning. She handed me a mug with a soft, easy smile. You okay? It felt more like a formality than a real question, something to fill the space rather than open it. I nodded, took the coffee, and sat at the table, the same seat where Bruce had made his point. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice steady. Just thinking. She didn't press, didn't ask about what. Maybe she didn't want to know. Maybe she already did. I took a slow sip, letting the heat burn my tongue, and made a decision. I wasn't going to let this fade into some quiet, embarrassing memory that we'd all pretend never happened. They had pushed me, and I was going to push back. When Harper left later that morning, heading out to run errands, the house settled into silence. Just the hum of the fridge. The steady tick of the clock. I opened my laptop and started typing. Simple invitations, nothing fancy. Just a time, a date, a place. Next Saturday. 6 p.m. Dinner at our apartment. One for Bruce and Elaine. Another for Trevor and Mia. My fingers hovered over the keys before pressing send. A brief flicker of doubt crossed my mind. Was this too much? Was I overreacting? Then I remembered Trevor's smirk. Bruce's voice. Harper's whispered tradition. I clicked done. No going back now. When Harper returned, arms full of grocery bags, I helped her unpack, keeping my tone casual. I invited your folks over again next weekend. She froze, a jar of pasta sauce halfway to the shelf. Her eyes flickered to mine, cautious. Why? I shrugged, sliding a loaf of bread into the pantry. Just to show we appreciate them. Keep things good. She frowned slightly, as if the answer didn't quite sit right, but she didn't argue. Okay, she said at last, and went back to putting things away. I could tell she was curious, maybe even uneasy, but she let it drop. That was fine. She'd see soon enough. The week passed in an odd way, both slow and fast, stretching out and yet vanishing before I could fully process it. At work, my hands moved on autopilot, sketching logos, refining layouts, but my mind was elsewhere. I caught myself staring at my screen, replaying how it would all go, imagining their faces when they walked in next time. Because this wasn't just about serving a meal anymore. I was setting the stage for something they wouldn't forget. At home, I planned carefully. Chose the menu with precision, not extravagant, not overly refined, but solid. Grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, a homemade pie for dessert. Simple, steady, familiar. Food I could control. I didn't tell Harper everything. She'd probably think I was being dramatic, tell me to let it go. But I couldn't. Every time I walked past the dining table, I saw it again, my plate, sliding away. Heard Bruce's words. Real men. By Friday, I had it all prepared. The ingredients were fresh, the chicken still cold from the butcher, the potatoes heavy in the sack. That night, I stood at the counter, seasoning the meat, pressing spices into its surface, letting it marinate as my mind raced ahead. From the couch, Harper watched me. Her book lay open in her lap, but her eyes weren't on the pages. You're really into this, she remarked, half teasing. I grinned, wiping my hands on a towel. Gotta make it good, right? She smiled back, and for a fleeting second, it felt like any other night. Like we were just a couple preparing for company. But I knew better. This wasn't about impressing them anymore. This was about reclaiming something. Something they hadn't even realized they had taken. That night, I barely slept. My mind ran in loops, rehearsing every detail. Every word I might say. I wasn't angry, exactly. It was deeper than that. This was about respect. About my place in this house, in this family. When morning came, I was up early again. Cleaning the kitchen. Setting the table. Arranging every detail just as carefully as before. Harper moved around me, quieter than usual, like she could sense something brewing. And then finally she spoke. You sure about this? Her voice was soft,